All right, guys, so we are going to start off with our day 6 notes. Remember that you should be taking notes while I am going over each one of these questions. Once you are done with this video, then you are going to go to the next video, and if you finish both of those, then you can work on the practice for day 6 and day 7. Again, we are combining these 2 days together because it ended up being on a block day. All right, so day 6 notes talks about comparing slopes. And if you remember from the previous week, we talked about how to find slope from a graph, from a table, from an equation. So now we're just going to be comparing those. So for function number 1, or for example number 1, we have 2 different functions. We have function number 1 where it's asking us to find the slope or the rate of change given here. So we have our hours, okay, versus our wages. And anytime we have a table, we always have an X and then we have a Y. And I'm going to make this a little bigger for us. All right, so we have an X and a Y. Now, going from the rate of change, so that slope, remember, is rise over run, or we can say the change in Y over the change in X, okay? Or we could use these and create ordered pairs. So we could also say y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So we've got a couple different ways that we can look at this. So if we look at, I'm going to pick purple. So going from 0 to 24, there is a change. We are adding 24. So that is our rise is 24 right here. And then we have our run, so we look at our change in x, that's going from 0 to 1, so that means that we're adding 1. So that becomes 24 over 1, or 24. So that's what we're going to put here. We are going to put that our slope, or our rate of change, is 24 for function number 1. So we can also put that right here, so 24. Okay, and then function number 2, we have to look at our equation. So it's y equals 18x plus 100. So we know that y equals mx plus b is our slope-intercept form. And we're just identifying our slope, which happens to be right here, that m, so it's 18. So function number 2 is 18. Then we just look and we determine, based off of those 2 numbers, is 24 or 18 greater? And that would be 24. So we just write a greater than sign. And that's it. So now moving on to the next one, we've got function number 1. So we're trying to find our slope. And again, we're just using our ordered, or our graph right here. So going from our blue dot to our pink dot, we're going to go ahead and see that we're moving up 1, 2, 3. So that is moving up 3, and then to the right 1. So my slope for function number 1 is 3 over 1, or we can just write it as 3 as well. All right, so then we look at function number 2. And we've got our y's. Notice there's the x and the y's. So we've got to make sure that when we're talking about the slope here, it's rise over run. Okay, so notice the y's are on the bottom here, but we've got to flip it. So when we talk about the change in y, we're going from 0 to 4. So that is adding 4 here. So my rise is 4 over my run, which is right here, that is 0 to 1, so that is plus 1. So my slope for function number 2 would be 4 over 1, or just 4. So we can write these. So I've got my function number 1, which is a slope of 3, and my function number 2, which is a slope of 4. So that means that function number 2 has a greater rate of change. Looking at this one right here, so again, we are given x and y table. So we're looking at our change in our y's over our change in our x's. So change in y would be going from 5 to 8, that is adding 3. And then going from 4 to 6, that is adding 2. So remember, this is rise over run. So the change in y over the change in x. So the change in y is 3 and the change in x is 2. So that makes our slope 3 over 2. Then let's compare that to function number 2. So we have, again, starting with our blue dot right here, going to our pink dot. Okay, so then we can see that we are moving up 1, 2. So moving up 2 into the right 1, 2, 3. Okay, so that would be rise over run. This is now 2 over 3. So the slope here is 2 over 3. So comparing those two, we've got a slope of 3 over 2 versus a slope of 2 over 3. And that means that we look at which number is greater, and that would be 3 over 2, because that's 1 1/2 versus not even being a whole number yet. All right, so again, we're going to compare. So we have function number 1 right here. So we have our first function being in slope-intercept form, so y equals mx plus b to find our slope. We have the m right here, so notice that it is in the same place. So our slope, or our rate of change, is 1/3 for function number 1. Looking at function number 2, right here, so we've got the change in y. Remember that triangle just means change. It's delta over change in x. So going from 1 to 2, that's adding 1. So that means that my change in y is 1, a positive 1. And then looking at my change in x, going from 4 to 8, that is adding 4. So that is a positive 4. So my slope right here is 1 over 4. So then we've got to compare. So 1 over 3 versus 1 over 4. Well, which one is more? Would you rather have a quarter of a pizza or a third of a pizza? And that would be 1/3 is bigger than 1/4. All right, so we're going to go ahead and move on to page 2. So now we've got a couple different word problems here, but guys, don't freak out. I know we haven't really talked about these, but they are pretty easy to figure out. So it says Sally charges a service charge plus $15 per item. So when we look at function number 1, for Sally charges $20, so she charges $20 overall, plus $15, and this is where you see per item. So do we know how many items she has? No, so we say per means to multiply, and the number of items we don't know. Well, $20 plus 15 times x, or we can write this as y equals 15x plus 20. Anytime you see that per, that's going to say multiplication, and that means that we are multiplying it to a variable, okay? And if we know that that is happening, then we know that this 15, the number that's being multiplied, is our slope. So we are going to write 15 here. The next one is the same thing. We have a table, an x and y table. So we've got the rise over the run. So function number 2 here. We're going from 25 to 35. That is adding 10. And then our run is adding 1. So rise over run, or the change in y over the change in x. This would be 10 over 1, or 10. So then comparing the two, we've got 15 versus 10. And that should be pretty obvious that 15 is greater than 10. Okay, right here we've got the 10-inch candle, okay, that burns. And if you burn a candle, that means that it's subtracting, right? So we've got 10, starting off at a 10-inch candle, burning, so subtracting 0.5 inches. And then you have this per, that means to multiply minute. We don't know the number of minutes, so we're going to call it x. So if I rewrite this expression, it would be negative 0.5x, and then that's a positive 10, so it's plus 10. So that means my slope here is this right here, this negative 0.5. Okay? Then we look at a line that passes through these 2 points. So I'm going to go ahead and label my pairs. So I've got x and y, an x and a y. And because this is ordered pair number 1, this is x1, y1. Because this is ordered pair number 2, x2, y2. Then I'm going to use that slope formula of m equals y sub 2 minus y sub 1 over x sub 2 minus x sub 1 and plug in my numbers. So here I've got 4 minus 3 over 5 minus 8. So then I'm going to go ahead and simplify, and I get that 4 minus 3 is 1 over 5 minus 3 is negative 3. So my final slope is negative 1 over 3. So now this is where it gets a little bit trickier. So I've got my first function, which is negative 0.5, or we could write it as negative 1/2. And then I have my second function, which is negative 1 over 3. Now, normally when you're comparing your numbers, negatives, you want them to be the one closer to 0. But if we're talking about a steepness, which one is a greater rate of change, the negative doesn't matter. We're still going to go with the number that is the steepest, that is the greater one. So we're taking the absolute value of our two fractions. So 1/2 versus 1/3, our greater slope, our greater rate of change is still going to be negative 1/2, even though this is a greater negative number. It's further away from 0. We're still trying to find the one that has the steepest slope. So that's where it gets a little tricky. So anytime we're looking and comparing slopes, we're still just looking at the number, not necessarily the negative part. All right, so let's look at these. Again, we've got a graph here, so looking at going from our blue dot right here to our pink dot, we are rising, and you can see that we are rising going from 3 to 6. That is adding 3, and we're moving to the right 1, which is a positive 1. So slope is rise over run. So it is a positive 3 over a positive 1. So I'm going to write 3 here. Then I move on to my function number 2. So this is giving me an ordered pair, or 2 ordered pairs. So I've got x1, y1, because this is ordered pair number 1. x2, y2, because this is ordered pair number 2. I'm going to use that slope formula of m equals y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. And again, I'm going to take all of that information that I just labeled and plug it in. So I've got 11 minus 3 over negative 14 minus, and then I've got this negative 12 here. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and simplify. So 11 minus 3 is going to give me 8 over negative 14 minus a negative 12. These two negatives make a positive here. So negative 14 plus 12 gives me negative 2, which then simplifies to be negative 4. So again, this slope right here is negative 4. So when I compare my function number 1 of 3 to my function number 2 of negative 4, again, I'm not looking at whether it's negative or positive. I'm looking at the steepness of a line, and the absolute value that is greater is going to be the one with the steeper slope, or the greater rate of change. So that would be 3 is less than the slope of negative 4. So even though the slope of 3, technically that number is greater. We're looking at the absolute value. So you can put absolute value around it, so then it's 3 is less than 4. All right, the last one for the notes for this part for today. Looking at this, we've got going from our blue dot at -1 to our pink dot. We can see that we are rising, so we are going from -1 to a +6, so that is adding 7, and then we are moving to the right 3. So my slope, rise over run, is 7/3. So the slope for the first function is 7/3. And then looking at the next one, of course, we are going to label ordered pair number 1, x1, y1, ordered pair number 2, x2, y2. So we're going to use that slope formula of m equals y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1 and plug in our information. So y2 is 26 minus y1, which is 5, over 8 minus 5. Okay, so then I'm going to simplify that, and 26 minus 5 is 21 over 8 minus 5, which is 3. So then 21 divided by 3 is 7. So we've got 7/3 versus 7. So looking at those two, and it should be pretty obvious that 7 is greater than 7/3. So that is our final answer. And that's it, guys. So you will go ahead, once this video is over, you can move on to day 7 notes. All right, see you in a minute.